Today is Wednesday, May 18th, 1 week away from the scheduled surgery date. And following up on my last chapter, I'm going to be talking about the Communication Center and what we achieved during the years I was director of the Communication Center, and then my decision to go to graduate school back to University of Pittsburgh. After Ron Washington was relieved of his duties and I was selected as the interim executive director, I agreed to a one-year term as interim, and then asked the board if they would consider me as permanent at that point, which they did. So part of the problem that I faced was simply rebuilding the management infrastructure for the organization, and that was really a learning process. I had never directed an organization before. I had directed programs, and I understood quite a bit about how the organization worked, but being the executive director was a whole new kettle of fish. It was something that I was not fully prepared for, and I realized that what I needed to do was simply throw a lot of time at the job. So I was routinely working 50 and 60-hour weeks, and this was difficult because I was trying to be a good father to David at this point, and he was staying with me for a good part of the time, even though he also lived with his mom during that period of time. It was like an MBA course in practical learning, not only financial management but human resources, program development, board relations, the whole ball of wax. And it was tough. And the big mistake I made during that period of time was thinking that I could do everything myself. And finally, after a couple years of just really exhausting myself, I had a heart-to-heart discussion with the board of directors and said, I can't do this anymore. I need each of you to take more responsibility as board members, and thankfully they agreed to do that. I had really a very good board in many respects. Bob Nagley was chair of the board, and Bob was very successful president of Nagley Outdoor, the big outdoor advertising company, and he was very supportive. George Reed, who has continued to be a lifelong friend and was with the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, was a board member. And there were a number of other board members. Andy Marlowe, who was with the university's radio station, was a great help during that time. And there were a number of others. But rebuilding the staff, coming up with new programs, and finding funding and working with the board all were great challenges. The organization really flourished during that time. In let's see, what year would that have been? It was the bicentennial year, 1976. We were named a Horizons on Display Award winner by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and what that meant is we were recognized in a book that was put together as one of the most innovative projects in the country, and I received a letter of commendation from President Ford, which I still have a copy of. We continue to position ourselves as a new kind of organization, a management support organization with a strong emphasis on communications, but with alliances with other organizations to provide board training and board development and a lot of other services. Along with the grant from the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, which was a big boost financially and in other ways, and it took us into 11 different cities, we were able to thrived during this period from 1973 to 1979. It was about 1977 that, with Marvin Feit's encouragement, I decided that I really needed to complete my academic work and go to graduate school. I looked at three possibilities that had dual degree programs. One was Columbia University, which had a master's in business administration, a master's in social work as their offering. Berkeley, which had a similar dual degree program, and the University of Pittsburgh, which had a master's in social work and a master's in public administration. But the University of Pittsburgh gave me some additional help in terms of a scholarship, partial scholarship, and an opportunity to be a teaching assistant. And it also was a place that I was familiar with. I had friends within the school and friends in other places in Pittsburgh. So returning to Pittsburgh seemed to make the most sense. And after applying and being accepted and then delaying my move to Pittsburgh from 1978 to 1979, I was happy to put everything together, and I bought an old telephone company van, put everything I had into that, and moved to a studio apartment in Oakland on Bayard, just within walking distance of the university. That move proved to be a wonderful move in a lot of ways. It brought me back to school, which was something that I was looking forward to in a lot of ways, and back into an academic setting. I found that the master's program at the University of Pittsburgh was much to my liking, and I was doing very well. And I was making a lot of contacts with people in the community development movement there. It wasn't long after I got there that I was introduced to Dave Burkholz, who was the Associate Director of the Allegheny Conference on Community Development. And Dave had somehow heard about the work that I had done in Minneapolis with the Communication Center, and he asked me if there was any way that I could recreate that kind of an organization in Pittsburgh. So he offered me the chance to do my field placement at the Allegheny Conference, and I could do that in a kind of consulting role where I would be a paid intern during that period. And I was also able to do some work for the Mott Foundation during that time, so I was able to support myself and begin the process of buying a house on the north side of Pittsburgh, which subsequently David and I moved into in March of 1980. But my assignment at the Allegheny Conference was to create the Community Technical Assistance Center, which I did, and to create a citywide community education program funded by the Mott Foundation, which I also did. And both of them came to life in early 1980, and I was offered the opportunity to be the executive director of either one of those because I had helped to create both of them. I chose the Community Technical Assistance Center, and Mo Coleman became the first chair of the board of the of CTAC, as we called it. We agreed that we would incubate this new program at the Health and Welfare Planning Association, HWPA, under the oversight of John McCormick, who was the executive director at the time. And while John and I initially got along very well, it became apparent that he began to see CTAC as a real feather in his cap, and therefore something that he wanted to have a major hand in directing. And I had to make it clear to him that I was the executive director and that I had an independent board of directors and independent funding. And so his relationship with me got a little bit strained, and it even got more strained when the United Way conducted their annual campaign, and he put much pressure on my staff members to contribute to the United Way, and some of them were very reluctant to do. One of the first people I hired was Don Waco. Don was both an accountant and an attorney, had his degrees in both, and he was a vital part of the organization. He later went on to serve in the state legislature, and today he's a judge in Pittsburgh. But he was very angry about being pressured by John McCormick on the United Way issue, as was Leslie Riker, who went on to work for the county, and she was my organizational development specialist working with neighborhood boards and organizations. And finally, the other people I hired, Madeline Woods was my office manager, and she and I have remained friends over the years. And we had a clerical person whose name I don't recall right now, but then we had a woman I hired whose name I won't mention, who was our communications consultant, and she proved to be very difficult. She was a committed Christian, and she had some very strong views as to the personal lives of some of the other staff members. One of the staff members, Don, was divorced and apparently living with a woman with whom he was not married. And so she let him know that she disapproved of that, and Leslie was trying to have a baby and not having any luck with that, and this woman made several remarks to Leslie that were inappropriate. So as time went on, her devotion to Christianity began to get in the way of the job. She was coming in the morning and taking an hour in the morning before she started working to pray, and she would lock her door and not take phone calls, and things just got pretty crazy after a while. One of my decisions that I should have made when at the time was I should have terminated her employment because of certain things she was doing and not doing, and I didn't do that. And then when I left, when I was asked to head the new organization called East Liberty Development, I handed over the reins of CTAC to my friend Dennis Candy, whom I had met in graduate school, and Dennis ended up having to terminate the employment of this woman, which took a long time, and it was very difficult for him. I regret that I didn't do that when I was the executive director, but passed the problem on to him. But CTAC again took off and became very popular, and we had some initial support from the city council and the mayor's office and from many of the community groups we were working with, and things seemed to be going very well. And as I mentioned, one of our clients was the newly formed group in East Liberty called East Liberty Development, Inc. And the chair of that board, who was the branch manager for Mellon Bank in the area, met with me one day, and I recall him kind of poking me in the chest and saying, "I want you to be our new executive director." And I said to him, his name was Dave Thomas, I said, "Dave, it seems like a very interesting job, but I have to tell you, I know next to nothing about real estate and the more monetary parts of community development." And he said, "You'll learn." And he was right. So I agreed to accept the job, and I resigned from CTAC. And as I said, Dennis Candy then stepped in as director and directed CTAC very well for the next few years. Starting a new organization, East Liberty was really a challenge, but a good one. I was the only staff person at first, and I needed an administrative assistant, so I went through one of the temp agencies and hired a woman named Denise Hines. And Denise was very capable. She was actually from Christiansted in the Virgin Islands, and she went on to become an attorney, and eventually she and her husband moved back to St. Croix, and she became, I think, the island's chief prosecuting attorney. But she and I also stayed in touch somewhat over the years. But Denise fell in love and married, and as I said, moved back to Christiansted, so I had to hire a new administrative assistant. And the next woman that was sent to me was Aldine King. Now, Aldine was a former actor. She had been active in Hollywood for about a dozen years, and had had bit parts in many of the most popular television programs at the time, including Dallas, Streets of San Francisco, Marcus Welby, MD. But she was a co-star of a show called The Karen Valentine Show, which was a sitcom that was popular for a couple of years, and she also had a major role in Project UFO, which was a pilot actually a series that Jack Webb, the guy that was famous for Dragnet, had produced. So she had a long history of work in Hollywood, and quite successful. And she was actually also very attractive. And I remember that we worked together for maybe a few months, and I had said to her, "Would you consider taking this job on permanently? I need a good administrative assistant, and you're very efficient and very good, and we get along well." And she said, "I can't decide whether I'd rather work for you or I'd rather go out with you." But she said, "Give me the weekend to think about it." And she came back on Monday and said, "I think I'd rather go out with you, date you, than work here, even though I'd like to work here." And I said, "Well, we can't do both." So we ended up starting to go out together, and we dated each other for at least a couple of years. We lived together for a while. And Aldine eventually left Pittsburgh and moved to Portland, and she now lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Aldine and I also stay in touch. But I began to build a staff. I hired Karen LaFrance, who was a city planner and had been working in East Liberty under the city planning department for a couple of years, knew the area well. She became my associate executive director, and then I hired a young woman named Marva Williams, who became our economic development specialist and worked with small companies that were trying to improve their lot. East Liberty was, I think, one of the real successes in the community development field, and today probably is considered in Pittsburgh to be one of a couple of the most successful neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, and maybe even in Pennsylvania and otherwise. There's lots of new businesses. It's a very desirable place to live now. There's new hotels going in. There's been lots of real estate investment. It is an exciting success story, and I wish I could take credit for that all. I will say that during the years I was executive director, from about 1982 to 89, it was we had a lot of successes, but the woman that eventually ended up taking over after the organization almost died because of some political pressures after Karen LaFrance was director for a few years. Her name is Maylene Myers, and she's done a great job of recruiting talent, and the staff at East Liberty Development has proven to be a great staff, and they've done great work over the years. So I'm very proud of what I helped to start, but I certainly can't take credit for all of the wonderful things that have happened in East Liberty. What did happen, though, was I was recommended for a job in Kalamazoo, Michigan by Bob Pease, who was the former director of the Allegheny Conference and whom I knew from my time working there as an intern. And Bob recommended me to be the president of a new organization in Kalamazoo called Downtown Kalamazoo Incorporated. I interviewed for the job, and I had previously interviewed for another job in Michigan as director of the Downtown Development Authority in Flint. But when Rita visited Flint, she said, I remember her comment was, you can take this job if you want, but I'm staying in Pittsburgh. I'm not moving to Flint. So that was the end of that adventure. But when she went to Kalamazoo, she found that she liked it, and we also discovered that the guy that was running one of the two major hospitals was from Pittsburgh, and so it looked like she had a great chance to get a job there working for Borges Medical Center and Tim Stack. And so we moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1989. John was born in 1990, and I will conclude right here and move on to the story of Kalamazoo in the next chapter.